Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our mini series here about catapulting our careers ashore. And I'm really excited for this conversation because I have Captain Tuuli Bookman here with us today. I also have Sarah Adams, which made the introduction. And so I'm really excited to hear from Captain Tuuli about her experience of having her career at sea and then all the thought that she put into what it was like to come ashore for her. So, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. This is great. I hope what I say can be helpful to someone. Hopefully, it won't be too boring. But I actually started out ashore at the time when I graduated the Merchant Marine Academy in 1986. And my boyfriend at the time had told me that I really didn't have what it took to go to sea, which was, of course, contrary to all evidence. I had great grades on my sea project. I had a wonderful time, but women tend to underestimate their own abilities. And so I put my tail between my legs and I accepted a shoreside job with Shell Oil. Again, this is 1986. I was quite clearly a token female, and I was the only woman on the floor who wasn't a secretary. So it was awkward, and I hated it. But I said I'd give it a year, and so I did. I gave it a year to the day, and on day 365, I quit and went limping back to California, my home, with a pussy cat and a U-Haul trailer behind my Camaro in August, driving across country. I don't recommend that to anyone. Anyway, I basically camped on my parents' couch at the time and waited to get a job. Back then, what is now AMO was called District 2, the union. So I get this call from the dispatcher, and he says, "Listen, kid, I can ship you out tomorrow as an AB, or you can wait around more if you want to wait for an officer's job." Well, I wanted off the couch desperately. He's like, "I'll take the AB job. I don't care." So I shipped out as an AB, was my first ship. And it was the best decision ever. I hate to call it a decision. It's not like I picked it. But anyway, I was mucking a tank out down in the bottom of this jet fuel tanker, really crappy old ship. Anyway, down there with me was a fellow Kings Pointer of my same year. So graduating together. And I look over at him and I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I was shoreside, but I hated it." He goes, "Yeah, me too." He goes, "Well, what did you do?" He goes, "Well, I was a tanker broker." So here we are in this horribly smelly, filthy ship with shovels rusting out, rust and muck we're scooping up and sending it in buckets up aloft. And we were both so happy. And we both left. I mean, I had a secretary, I had an expense account, doing the whole thing, an air conditioned office, and I used to wear pantyhose to work, but I was miserable. So anyway, so then we just laughed about the irony of all that. So anyway, I continued to go to sea for a number of years, and back in those days, I only sailed with another female aboard, I think once, and she was a steward. So I never sailed with another female officer ever. So times are different now, but it was very lonely, and I couldn't, you can't make friendships of any meaningful sort because the men are either mostly married, or if you do become friends with someone who's not married, they live in a different state, and the odds of you ever seeing them again are zero. So, like, what's the point? Or there's some romantic thing, which is, totally inappropriate out there anyway. So it was very lonely. I was lonely for the men too, but triply so for me. And as I rose through the ranks, I would sort of look around and I was like, is this what I want to do when I'm 45? Do I want to be a single or unhappily married woman out here? I wanted a dog. I wanted a plant. I'd like to have a subscription to a newspaper, maybe. And I'd like to have some friends that I could go have a cup of coffee with every now and then. So none of that could happen with me going to sea. So I was on a ship going to Guam, and I had been everywhere. The job had ceased to be an adventure. I'd been everywhere I wanted to be, was making oodles and gobs of money, and I was single and lonely and frankly bored. And I looked out the window. I saw an albatross go by, and I was just so thrilled to see a living creature, because everyone knows there's nothing between anywhere and Guam, right? So anyway, I saw this bird And then there was nothing. And I realized I was trading blocks of time for cash. And that's when I decided I have to change my life. I'm wasting my life. I've got all this money and nothing to do with it and no one to spend it with in any joyous or meaningful way. So I reached out to my parents, who weren't very helpful. And I was thinking maybe I should buy real estate. Maybe I should go back to school. The time everybody was getting an MBA. I thought, oh, maybe I'll just get an MBA. Like, that bores me half to death. And no, I don't want to do that. I've always wanted to be a physicist, but I'd have to start over to do that. And my father, who is from New York and not very subtle, he said to me, kid, with your mouth, you ought to just go to law school. So, because I'm mouthy. Anyway, so I did. I applied, and there's a hell of a sea story there, the LSAT day. But I did go to law school, and there are only 2 law schools that really have any maritime law program, and I picked the one that was in California because that was home for me. So I went to University of San Francisco School of Law, participated in the law program, and was involved with the Maritime Law Journal there. And I loved it. It was an intellectual stretch, which was nice. And for me, Kings Point was, I felt very well trained and very poorly educated. And I think most Maritime Academy grads would agree with that. I don't care where you go, but you're very well trained and pretty poorly educated. So it was nice to have that intellectual stretch. And so that for me was very nourishing. I went full time. I didn't do the night program. So by going full time, I was with a lot of younger people. The night classes tend to be older people who were working and then would go at night. So I was with a bunch of people a lot younger than I was, which was good for me. I enjoyed it very much. So I did a maritime law internship, and I saw how those attorneys, what their life was like, the money that they made, and what they were expected to do. And I knew then I never wanted to practice law to make a living, but I was so grateful for the exposure and the experience. And when I talked to the other lawyers, I didn't find very many that were happy. So, so like, okay, well, it's nice to have that to fall back on. And when I mentioned to Sarah about it's important to have a backup plan that you can make money from the neck up, because I mean, you could be in a car wreck, you could lose eyesight in one eye, or any number of things could preclude you from making a living at sea. And wouldn't it be lovely to have the option of making money with your grades? And so that's why I think graduate school is very important for every mariner, because our job does require a level of physical fitness that other jobs don't. So I think it's important to go sow your wild oats, go to sea, have your adventures. But as you start reaching into your late 20s and early 30s, you might want to think about at least having the option of moving ashore graciously, and go get some extra additional education. I've never met anyone that's regretted spending money and time on education. Think about it. It can never be stolen. It will never be worth less. Can't be burned down. So I've met a lot of people who've regretted not going to school, and I've never met anyone who's regretted getting an advanced degree. And it doesn't matter that you'll never use it. I actually do use my law degree now as a consultant, but that having that JD allowed me to then work at Cal Maritime. So I get out of law school, and guess what? I catch a ship going back to Guam. That's the irony. Back to Guam, but I'm looking out the window with a whole different perspective now. It's like, okay, I'm trading time for cash, but that's cool. I don't have to do this anymore. And I got back, and I don't know if I applied. I don't remember how it happened, but I got a call from the Maritime Academy in California asking me to do a quick 30-day trip on their training ship. And it was the Golden Bear 2. And that ship was riveted. That's how old that ship was. And they said, listen, it's our last run. She's riveted. we really don't trust her, so we're going to keep one foot on the beach and just go down to Mexico and back, but we're always in range of a salvage tug, so you'll be okay. So just a quickie, how does that sound? And I was like, oh, that sounds like an adventure. What the hell? 30 days, I can do that on my tippy toes. So I get on board the ship, and I had such a great time. I felt at home. I loved working with cadets. It just felt really welcoming, and I just stayed. And then they hired me on as an assistant professor, and I ended up staying there for 23 years. So anyway, that's kind of my story. I don't know how deliberate everything was, but for me, I knew I wanted to be married, and I wanted to have a meaningful relationship, not just with a husband, but with friends and neighbors and things like that. And I've never believed in the work-life balance. I hear this all the time, and I bristle, because when you're balancing things, no one is getting 100%.
That's a great
And
point.
what I saw when I looked around, and this is just my opinion, and you can save your flamethrowers for later, but my opinion is that if you're working full time in a stressful job, you're giving your employer your absolute best waking hours. And then you get home, and what you're giving your family is kind of your leftovers. They're not getting the good silver. Your employer is getting the best of you. And I kind of wanted to not do that. I wanted to be able to be married, have a child in a stable, committed home, and actually raise that child and not have the child raised by strangers. So it was for me, teaching was perfect. I had a grueling 4-day work week, maybe worked 4 hours a day. It was just the perfect situation for me to raise a child. And I couldn't have done it going to sea, not with the standards that I wanted for my life. So for me, teaching was great. I don't know of too many other jobs that have those kind of work hours and things. And the pay was not good. It was probably a third of what I made, but it was worth it. The lifestyle was just totally worth it.
I think those are really valid points, that you have to figure out what the lifestyle is that you want and what it is that you're looking for. And that all takes time to figure out. And then it took you finding that albatross and realizing that's what I need and this is what I'm looking for. And so thank you so much for sharing that story. Sarah, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Captain Tuuli, for sharing your story. I was wondering if you could kind of expand upon the part of, okay, your first thought of, yes, I do want to change my lifestyle, to seeing the albatross and saying, you know what, it is time to change. How long was that period? And do you have any advice for mariners currently on ships that are kind of struggling to take that leap and finally make the decision to say, you know what, enough is enough?
For me, one of the things I was very careful not to do was to get into debt, because when you're in debt, you're not nimble anymore, and you're not free to just quit. And so I was lucky. I don't know if it's luck or good planning, but I was very, very careful not to get into debt and not to get into any kind of a situation where I couldn't be nimble and quit or pivot at a moment's notice. And I've heard, as an academy professor, I work with a lot of students, and I that there were some of the young men would graduate and marry very quickly and buy a house and have a mortgage and a wife and a dog and a potted plant. And now they're locked in, and they decide after a year or two that they were miserable at sea. There was one young man, he wanted to be a chef. And the only reason he went to Cal Maritime was because his father and his grandfather and, his whole family had gone to Cal Maritime. So he was there under sort of false pretenses, and it wasn't his passion. But now he's locked in, and his debt obligations were sort of matched to his income. So he couldn't take a lower paying job the way I could. He had to make $150,000 a year just to support that the life he created. So I think it's really important when you're young and you're new, if you're not really sure yet what your sort of long-term path is going to be, that you keep yourself nimble and not burden yourself with family obligations, financial obligations, and things like that. So that freed me up. Honestly, I could quit and I wouldn't have to work for 6 months and I would be fine. Had I taken on a lot of debt, I don't think I would have had the freedom to quit. So I was able to quit, and I could afford to rent a modest apartment. And today's younger people, they seem very reluctant to take roommates and things like that. In my parents' day, my mother had a roommate as a young woman. It was not unusual at all for people to literally rent a room in a boarding house. And now I feel like young people say, oh, I have to have a 2-bedroom apartment and cable TV and this kind of a car and my $6 Starbucks every month. And that locks you in then, making a certain amount of money to support that. Whereas perhaps if you had a little bit of a more modest posture, it would free you to quit a job you didn't like and give you the time you needed to percolate. So that would sort of be how it worked for me. I had the luxury of time because I had money. And to me, money is freedom. And I could have lived anywhere I wanted and had the time to poke around and find a job. Cal Maritime for me was not a job that I pursued aggressively and was hoping that they would pick me. I just got lucky, and it was just a random situation that ended up working out beautifully. But there's a wonderful story about George Lucas, the Star Wars guy. He wanted to be an architect, and he was in architect school, and it was his final year, and he was missing a social studies units. And the only class that would fit his schedule was a nighttime class, and it was in film. And he was so pissed. He's like, oh my God, this is going to just be so bad. I hate this. I want to be an architect. So he signs up for this class. It's the only one that would fit. And then look what happens. So I think when you're young, you need to eat from the buffet of life, sample everything, because if you don't have a really focused passion, which most of us don't, right? But you need to try that dish that might be something you've never tried, and it might just bite you and be your passion. And for me, that was Cal Maritime. It was a lucky dish at dim sum that I happened to get this 30-day gig, and it was like, oh my God, I love this. And so I got very, very lucky, but you have to expose yourself. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you so much. Yes. And I had no idea about George Lucas. That's awesome.
Right?
Captain Tuuli, one more question about the graduate school kind of portion. You mentioned getting an MBA, and that was pretty popular. I find that that's still kind of the case today. Do you think it's wise to go after a graduate degree that you're passionate about, or that might be better suited for a mariner or kind of pair with our background?
I think you should go with what you're passionate about. You only go around once, right? You get one crack at this. And I just think you should go with what you're passionate about, because that's what you're going to think about when you're sitting on the toilet. That's what you're going to think about at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep. And my stepdaughter, who I raised, went into the Air Force, and she was pursuing a master's degree through the Air Force offerings, which were very limited. So she had like 6 majors she could pick from, and she was picking based on which one sucked the least. And like, wow, man, that's not how I'd want to invest my time and money. So guess what she's doing now? She's got a master's degree in international relations. She's back at art school, getting a second bachelor's in art, and she's out of the Air Force. So she's finally pursuing her passion at 31 years old. So some of that was our fault for not encouraging her to pursue art at 21, but hindsight. But no, I think you should go what you're passionate about, because then it's not work, and you'll excel at it just naturally. You'll just fit into the groove, and it won't feel like this exercise where you're constantly beating your head on a wall and dreading every paper, dreading every book that they're going to ask you to read. So I chase your heart. I mean, if you have a passion, or even just a mild interest, that's, in my opinion, where you should go. You look at, at the university level, they didn't care that I had a law degree. I could have had a degree in things, just they needed an advanced degree to open the door. and it separates you a little bit from the crowd. It shows that you finish what you start and that you're capable of completing a sentence, writing a paper, you know. So I don't think you should pursue advanced degrees based on what you think the market will want in 3 or 4 years. And then what? You've just signed yourself up for a lifetime of something you're not really that interested in. So there's this Venn diagram out there, and I don't know who it is, so I don't know if it's copyrighted, but there's 3 circles that overlap, right? And one of them says what you're good at. The other circle that overlaps says what you love. And then the third overlapping circle says what the universe needs.
Yeah.
And the sweet spot is right in that middle spot.
Yeah.
And I think that's fabulous advice.
Tuuli, I just ran across that Venn diagram the other day, so I'll have to.
You know who did it?
I can't remember. I feel like it's of Asian ancestry, and so I'll see if I can find it and put it into this presentation, because I think it's so true. And we can't always find that job that satisfies what the universe needs and what we love and what we're actually good at. But if we do, then that's it, you know? And so, but as long as we can get a couple of those in there to overlap and intersect, then it's going to make a difference in the world and in our lives, I think.
Oh God, I agree so much. And plus, if you're close, if you're close, it'll introduce you to other people. I'm reading this fabulous book now about networks and nodes, and how jobs are not gotten through your closest friend network. Jobs are gotten through those sort of ancillary people.
Right.
They're on sort of the outer fringes.
Yeah.
And it's those sort of very weak connections that tend to bear fruit. Like, oh, I know somebody I might call that could maybe get me an interview, kind of thing, but not your best friend.
Right.
And so if if you can just find something that's kind of getting you close in the right direction, sort of, and then you'll meet people and like, oh, well, this angle, you know what I mean? It's like you're kind of making your way generally in a northerly direction, but you're not quite sure exactly what the course is yet. But yeah, that's how people, I think, land into those joyous, meaningful professions where it's their sweet spot and they just thrive. Yeah.
And I think one question I have for you, and this might be our last one to wrap it up, is, did you let people know? You told your parents, you talked to them about it, and then who else in your network did you tell, like, I'm coming ashore, I'm making a change? And was there any fear around that decision to share? Or was it something very personal and private that you went through yourself before?
So my parents, like I said, were not helpful.
Right.
They knew nothing about the industry. They thought I was crazy from the get-go. So never in my career pathway have they been a source of good advice. And then because I had been at sea all the time, I didn't have a friend network. But I would have, nowadays with LinkedIn and all the stuff, none of this stuff existed back then. Right. I would be blasting this to the universe that I'm looking for something in this rough, orientation. I want to be a photographer for National Geographic or, whatever. things happen to you at sea that spark an interest. I want to be a professional surfer. I have a student that's doing that. So, I would not keep this private. Why would anyone keep this private? Because you want to fertilize, your life with people who know you or know of you and might know of an interesting, unique opportunity, even if it's just a quick shot. Just, right. Hey, can you come help, scoop the elephant down in the summer? I know you're free.
Yep. Yeah.
End up in Thailand and you end up, starting your own charter boat company or something. So all because you went to Thailand to scoop elephant poop. So I think you just need to expose yourself to as many people who know things you don't know and who've sampled and experimented, who can introduce you to things you wouldn't even know to ask about. So for me, not private. I'd be blasting this all over the place. And fear? What fear? I can always go back to sea.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
That's the beauty. Keep that license. Don't let it lapse ever. And, if you're broke because you bought too many sports cars, just go back to sea.
Captain Tuuli, thank you so much for your time. This has been such a great conversation. I think that you're going to be inspirational to people who are trying to make this path themselves. And so thank you so much for your time. Sarah, thank you so much for your questions and for joining us and for making this introduction. I really appreciate you both being here with me.
Thank you so much.